Hello and welcome back to It's Okay When Liberals Do It on No Bullshit. Today I've got a juicy part 3 for this series that I really think you all are going to enjoy. Last time we talked about how the Democrats are impeaching Trump over virtually nothing, which is the same thing many of these same liberals said the American government shouldn't do back in the 90s too, when President Bill Clinton was impeached for lying under oath. So needless to say, impeaching Trump now for far less comes across as very hypocritical on the left's part. And that's giving them the benefit of the doubt too, and assuming the charges they brought up against our current president are even true. Spoiler warning, they're not. And the only reason Trump's impeachment passed anyway was because the Democrats have a majority and they voted against him right along party lines, and they had no other multi-party support. Regardless, we're not going over that again too much today, but our final story is impeachment related too, since we do have direct evidence of Joe Biden doing the very same quid pro quo kind of deal with Ukraine, the same one which the liberals just impeached Trump for. That's right. And that means a lot here too, since Biden is of course running for president now, and he's the frontrunner for the Democrats as well. Hence the title of today's video, It's Okay When Liberals Do It. But before we get too deep into quid pro quo Joe, let's first talk about two other distinct It's Okay When Liberals Do It moments from the last few weeks. The first one is something I've talked about briefly in other videos before too, but I wanted to reintroduce the topic and expand upon it here because it fits within this series so well. You may remember a video I did a few weeks ago about one of my favorite based actors out there, Chris Pratt. He's a well-established and well-liked leading man and actor in many Hollywood projects these days. But the left just can't leave the guy alone for pretty obvious reasons. Chris is not only straight, white, and male, but also he's a family man and church-goer. This pretty much encapsulates everything the left hates these days too, so it's no wonder Pratt has had numerous attacks thrown at him in recent years. None of the insults or attacks ever stick against the guy though, because Chris has pretty much done nothing wrong ever. And this particular criticism we're talking about today, it really stood out recently too, because it's also a great example that matches this video series and title. For those familiar with the story, basically Chris Pratt posted a picture of himself after a workout at a gym. This prompted another high-profile actor, Jason Momoa, to respond criticizing Pratt in what turned out to be a very hypocritical way that backfired immensely very quickly. You see, Jason M took umbrage with Chris holding a plastic water bottle in his picture. Apparently, Momoa has been swept up in the recent renewed interest in environmentalism among left-wingers, or at least supposed support for the environment. Specifically, they've been trying to drum up concern about climate change recently as a way to garner interest in their party and to get votes for their side in the upcoming election, the presidential election happening in November 2020. But while the left loves preaching about recycling and helping the environment and shit, acting as if they're saving the world while they do it, well, they're not nearly as interested in practicing what they preach though. Jason Momoa, for example, here was exposed using water bottles himself, which resulted in him getting egg on his face as well and having to apologize for this attack against Chris immediately. Other left-wingers have been exposed as hypocrites on this issue too, like of course media darling and new Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Alex was one of the biggest names who pushed climate change and its hysteria earlier this year, mostly because she started off 2019 by introducing her bogus fake environmental protection plan called the Green New Deal. The thing about that though was it was actually just a bunch of far-left socialist and communist-like policy changes, masquerading as if it was a plan to protect the environment and save the world when it really wasn't. And nothing proved Cortez wasn't taking her fear-mongering here as seriously as she let on, more than her very own actions. For example, Alex Cortez never stopped using air travel like how she proposed the whole country should do in her silly green plan. In addition, Cortez also still rides around in gas-guzzling oversized SUVs, instead of using electric cars like she wishes to force upon the rest of us. The list of hypocrisies for her here goes on and on too, and with other politicians as well, particularly left-wingers. For another example, former President Barack Hussein Obama recently bought a lavish mansion at the premier rich people town of Martha's Vineyard, which also happens to be an island with very low land elevation. That means if the water levels were to really rise, as the Democrats claim will happen with climate change, well, then Obama is going to be underwater in less than 12 years, which is when they claim the world will end because of this. But apparently even the former leader of the left-wingers isn't buying this garbage climate change hysteria bullcrap. And that's why when it comes to the environment and saving the world through recycling and other BS, it's pretty obvious when the left says we can't do things like use water bottles or ride in gas-powered cars or airplanes. Well, obviously, according to them, them, it's still okay when they do it themselves. Next, let's move back to talking about the Democratic presidential candidates. But before we get to Quid Pro Quo Joe specifically, let's talk about all the candidates who are currently left in the left field, so to speak. Because after both Cory Booker and Kamala Harris dropped out recently, we're now left with a not so diverse or multicultural candidate pool at all. And sure, we still have the Hawaiian candidate Tulsi Gabbard on the board, and the Asian one Andrew Yang is still there too. They're still hanging on by a thread though. And I think we all know these guys are real long shots, and neither will make it much further in the primaries. So with that said, all we really have left is old white people here. Besides the minor exception of Mayor Pete, who's not that old, he's only 37, but he's a reach candidate too, and will not likely make it any further past this unless something really dramatic happened. Now, with that said, we've got a very old, very white group of candidates left for the Democrats here, and that wouldn't normally be a problem either. I mean, I've got nothing against either of those groups of people, of course, but liberals certainly do. In fact, they've been railing against white people for years now. Democrats constantly push diversity and multiculturalism too. But then at the same time, when it comes down to choosing their own leaders and leaders for the country, they still go with the whites. It wouldn't be such a big deal too if it weren't for these same leftists being against us so publicly. And even worse, if the Republicans had a candidate field this old and white, the left would be calling us all racist and out of touch right away. In fact, they did make those claims, many of them, against Trump and other conservatives repeatedly in the last election. But now when their turn comes around, old and white and out of touch is a-okay because, of course, it's always okay when liberals do it. Finally, let's dig into good old quid pro quo Joe Biden, because right now he's the frontrunner of the Dem candidates, and also he exhibits a number of hypocrisies of his side while he's doing this. First of all, let's address the man's health. Democrats often attack Trump for being old and unhealthy, supposedly, right after he was elected specifically. But then Trump proved them wrong by having glowing reviews from his doctor, the same doctor who oversaw Obama's health, by the way, so no biases there whatsoever. In addition, Donald J. Trump never showed the kinds of scary old-timer, senior citizen, borderline Alzheimer's-like behavior that Joe has been going through on the campaign trail publicly. He's been forgetting where he is sometimes, slurring his speech, Joe repeats himself, misspeaks, and very much more. But the left is more than happy to overlook the many signs of his deterioration in health here, because they don't care when it suits their needs and it helps their guys. In addition, in the last debate, Joe's growing age actually came up specifically in a line of questioning. The moderator asked Joe if he would commit to running for a second term if he ends up winning the election. This is an important question too, because Biden would be over 80 years old by the time he would be running for re-election if he were to win president, which will never happen. And if he runs while he's over 80, that would make him the oldest sitting president ever. But Joe duffed that question up hard and said he wouldn't make a promise right now because he knows he's already old as hell, and in 4 or 5 years, he'll likely need to be put into a home or something. Next, let's talk about why Biden is being called Quid Pro Joe specifically now. And for those who don't know, quid pro quo is a Latin phrase used in English to mean an exchange of goods or services, in which one transfer is contingent upon the other, a favor for a favor, if you will. Normally, this term isn't necessarily good or bad either, but it can have bad connotations in certain situations, especially in politics. For example, the whole Trump impeachment thing is based on accusing the president of making a supposed quid pro quo deal with the Ukraine. The Democrats suggested that Trump asked Ukraine to make up dirt to pin on his political opponent, Joe Biden himself. But in actuality, Trump just asked if the guy had done anything really wrong and if any dirt actually existed. And you know what? Shocker, Joe did do many things wrong. So Trump was right to ask about this, and he has every right to talk to and converse with the Ukrainian government about this if he so chooses, because he is the sitting US president and our head diplomat. That means the only way the left could possibly make this look bad for Trump was through their dramatic, misconstrued presentations and false assumptions and made up bullocks. And the worst part of all of this is the fact that Joe Biden actually publicly admitted to making a quid pro quo deal with Ukraine himself on a now archived video from a live event not too long ago. We'll get to that damning video soon too, but first, let's just recognize how stupid and hypocritical this all is. President Trump gets impeached by biased Democrats just a few weeks ago because he asked Ukraine if Biden did anything wrong with them. This was misrepresented as an illegal quid pro quo deal, which ended up being what Biden actually did and admitted to himself. And now the leading candidate for the Democrats is obviously guilty of the crime they just impeached the sitting president for. You really can't make this kind of hypocritical bullshit up if you tried. And if you did try and make this up, you would think it was a work of fiction, because only a parody artist or true satirist could come up with some something so incongruent and out there and so gosh darn hypocritical and over the top. For more details on the quid pro quo Joe story, check out this article from Fox called "CNN's Chris Cuomo Admits Biden Absolutely Engaged in Quid Pro Quo with Ukraine, but not for personal advantage." If you say so, Cuomo, but I don't think Biden got his son hired for that very lucrative oil job gig in Ukraine, which he had no experience for. Well, I don't think that just came out of nowhere and for no reason. It wasn't good luck that got the Biden family rich off of Ukrainian money. It was Joe's political influence there and him making shady deals and throwing his weight around while he was vice president at the time. So with that said, it was still nice for Fredo Cuomo here from CNN to admit Biden engaged in quid pro quo. Now let's see what else they have to say in this article. CNN anchor Chris Cuomo made a rare concession on Wednesday night when he said former Vice President Joe Biden absolutely engaged in a quid pro quo with Ukraine, but not for his personal advantage. During a fiery debate with President Trump's lawyer Jay Sekulow, Cuomo argued that a quid pro quo wasn't necessarily for an abuse of power. "This isn't just about the law, this is about finding something worthy of impeachment or not," Cuomo told Sekulow. "Something can be wrong but not a felony. An abuse of power can be wrong but not a felony." The Cuomo primetime anchor then asked Trump's attorney if he thought it was okay for the president to ask Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to help him with a political opponent. Right, well, of course, as we've gone over repeatedly, and also what's in the transcript of Trump's phone call and what it reads specifically, well, we could tell there was no quid pro quo for his case. Even the Ukrainians themselves exonerated Trump and said there was no quid pro quo on their end. But the Democrats are so hell-bent on slandering their opponent here, they won't even listen to their alleged victims. They're deciding they know better than everyone, and they're above the truth and above what's right and what the law states. And to make matters even worse, they're actually admitting Joe Biden did commit quid pro quo, but somehow they want to deny he gained anything from it, even though we know that's totally bogus. In addition, Trump didn't gain anything from his alleged quid pro quo, but I guess that doesn't matter because when it's a Republican, you can't even ask about stuff. But meanwhile, Democrats, well, we all know it's okay when they do it. Lastly, let's take one quick look at that very damning video of Joe, which should be shared by every Trump supporter in the world right now, because this is the kind of evidence that will ensure Joe Biden never becomes president. And more important, this is what could get Trump his second term. Just take a look at this.
And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, "No," I said, "I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion." They said, "You have no authority. You're not the president." The president said. I said, "Call him."
Okay, a little context helps this make more sense. Basically, Biden was VP for 8 years before 2016, and while working under Obama, Biden was assigned to be the main contact and operator in the Ukraine, which gave him lots of influence and things to do there. But when this prosecutor he's talking about started to look into Biden and his family and his dealings, Joe decided he didn't like that. So what he did was hold out $1 billion of U.S. aid, and he held it over the heads of Ukraine, saying he won't give it to them until this prosecutor gets fired or reassigned or whatever. And this is pretty much the textbook definition of bad quid pro quo. And it's also obviously being done for personal gain for Biden and his family because that prosecutor was investigating them. And in the end, I don't see how this situation and this clip can get any better of an example of it's okay when liberals do it. Because while Trump is getting falsely framed up and impeached for a small phone call he had in private and he had every right to make, well, Biden is sitting on stage bragging about using quid pro quo for his own personal benefit illegally, and all the while, everyone in the room is laughing and cheering him on. What a joke. What do you guys think? Were these some good examples that fit the series and its premise nicely? Do you think it's pretty crazy that Biden can still be a frontrunner for president after he's been caught bragging about doing the very same misdeed the current president was falsely impeached for? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.